I believe when you sign an artist or when you manage an artist or when you do anything with an artist, you're taking on a tremendous responsibility. Forget about the money you're spending or your job you're putting on the line or whatever that kind of stuff is. Like, you know, for an artist, I think outside of probably their child or their mother, there's nothing more important to them than their art, right? Than their music. And you're taking partial responsibility for that.
Andrew, what's up, man? How you doing today?
How's it going?
It's going very well. Very excited to have you on. How was fresh off the holidays? Do you enjoy your break?
Fresh off the holidays, had a great break.
Nice.
Watched a lot of movies, caught up on music that, you know, I hadn't necessarily had a chance to listen to.
Yeah.
Went through all the top 10 lists and, you know, kind of got into stuff that I hadn't had a chance to really dig into for fun.
That's the thing about the music industry. I feel like it's over Christmas and New Year's Eve, people like refuse to work. So even if you want to work, it's like nobody's available. So you might as well just read a book or watch a movie or something, you know?
Totally. It's full like culture catch up time.
Right. Exactly.
And I'm a culture junkie. So for me, you know, I just want to absorb as much as humanly possible.
Right. And where are you from originally?
I'm born and raised in New York, in Manhattan.
Okay, cool. Dope.
Yeah.
So
Upper West Side.
There it is. So very excited because I think you have a really great broad array of experience in the industry, from both the management side to the A&R side, doing A&R at a very high level at some incredible labels, to now also working on some of the kind of the brand partnership side and helping brands stay culturally relevant. Can you just give a little bit of a kind of 10,000 foot view through your kind of journey and the different experiences you had, and then we'll start to really peel away?
Sure. Look, I think of myself as a professional music and, you know, now kind of professional entertainment fan. That's kind of always been my point of access. That's always been, you know, where I start everything from. I grew up, like I said, in New York, and as a result was really lucky just as far as the amount of access to culture that I had. And also freedom, you know, like it was very easy. As soon as you're, you know, old enough to ride the subway by yourself, you can basically be anywhere and at anything.
Right.
And I was also fortunate enough to have a really good fake ID, which, you know, which literally comes into play in the story of how I ended up working in music. But, you know, basically I was just a music head, and I was luckily able to be exposed to everything. I mean, really everything from, you know, within the same week, you know, probably my freshman year of high school, I would be going to see, you know, a pop punk band at the Knitting Factory or CBGB's. And then, you know, legitimately kind of small band. And then I would kind of go sneak into a club somewhere and see, you know, some form of electronic music. And then someone at my school's dad would have some hookup and, you know, have passes to Jingle Ball to see Britney Spears or whatever it was. And, you know, so as I was really kind of across the spectrum and kind of just totally exposed to absolutely everything, and on purpose, by design. Like, that's what I loved. I don't think I realized it then, but what I really loved was subcultures and kind of different worlds and seeing things come up out of them. So basically I turned that into, you know, I found out, you know, probably when I was 16 or so that A&R was a job. I found that out by walking into Barnes & Noble one day, and there's a book by Bill Flanagan called A&R. I had no idea what it stood for, but the book cover was a guitar, an ashtray, and a bottle of whiskey. I was like, this looks cool. And, you know, next, you know, it's basically the fictionalized story of a bunch of A&R guys. And as soon as I found out that you could make money, you know, I always knew, backtrack, I always knew that I wasn't an artist. I never wanted to be, you know, in the foreground. I was actually doing my homework on you guys and listening to the interview with Derek from RCA, who I love. But he said something, I think he said, you know, everyone in the business starts by wanting to be an artist. I was like, no, not me. I'm kind of the exception to that rule.
Right.
I never had any interest in kind of being that center of attention. So once I found out that there was a way to work around that, you know, that there was a business side of music, that was all I cared about.
Yeah.
I had absolutely no contact in the music industry. I was not kind of lucky enough to be born into a family of, you know, entertainment industry people. What I did have was a mother who owned a preschool, and by coincidence, she had in her school the children of a guy named Jeff Jones, who's now at Apple Records, but for a long time had been at Legacy at Sony. And that was the closest I had to a contact in music. And I kind of asked Mom, if I write this guy a letter, will you just pass it along to him? And she was kind enough to do so, and he was kind enough to open it. And I still credit him with, really getting me in the door. And he, basically the best he could do was say, I'll have HR try and, meet with you. Mm-hmm. I got there. I was going into my senior year of high school. And I had no idea what I wasn't going in for an A&R role. I was, whatever I can do would be fantastic.
Right.
And, the first obstacle was they told me that they could only do it for college credit or for some sort of school credit. There was no internship program in my high school. But somehow I think I convinced the principal or my dean or someone to write a letter saying I was getting some sort of credit. So I'd met that criteria. And then, they told me that there was a program they were thinking about starting as A&R internship. Would I want to go meet with the guy who was running that? And, so of course I wanted to do that. And that was at Columbia Records. So I get brought upstairs to this office and it says President of Columbia Records on the door. And we go into this really big office and this just like 24-year-old dude with tattoos walked in and there's like a PlayStation and a big screen TV. And I'm like, this is what is going on here? And we start talking and I found out later that guy was not the president of Columbia Records. That was the president's assistant, who is still to this day one of my closest friends. He's an amazing guy you should probably have on the show at some point, named Alex Hackford, who's the head of music for PlayStation.
Oh, wow. Nice.
Now, but at the time he was, I think he was assisting Will Botwin and was going to be promoted to an A&R guy. And he had this idea to start an internship program, basically using college kids as scouts. Mm-hmm. And so basically, his questions were, what do you listen to? And I rattled off a bunch of bands that I was loving who, also their demos were on the president's desk. I mean, these were bands that were kind of already starting to bubble, but, really, again, in a small way. Mm-hmm. And, bands I knew the guys in and, they were kind of friends of friends. And so I kind of, used that to my advantage. And then the only other question was, do you have a fake ID? Can you go to shows? And I was like, that's not a problem at all.
Yeah.
And I was hired. And so I spent that summer doing nothing but, being in the office, absorbing as much as I could, hanging out, listening to music, going to shows, and really kind of learning what working at a label really meant from, there was no making copies. I lucked out in that sense.
Right.
And then they offered to let me come back in the fall around my high school schedule, my senior year. So I did that. And then, really from there, Alex left to go to Sanctuary. And so I started interning for him there a few days a week. And then the other days I was still going to Columbia. And that program ended up succeeding. Another really good friend of mine who I interned with, a guy named Andrew McGinnis, brought in an artist through this kind of intern scouting program. The artist was John Legend. And basically that he's signed to Columbia. And while we were still interning, the album came out and had an incredible first week. And I think that proved the concept that interns can be valuable assets as scouts. And so they hired Andrew and myself and one other person as junior A&R scouts. I think we were getting like $100 a week, but we got a business card, which was really all I cared about because it kind of legitimized what I was doing. And from there, I spent the next 13 years at Columbia. Wow. So that was when I started there when I was like, 17. Mm-hmm. And I was there through the time I left when I was 30.
Wow.
But that's kind of the overview
of the Columbia journey. And then you became the SVP of A&R at Capitol.
Then I became the SVP of A&R at Capitol. Went over there for 3 years. The whole time that, from the time I was leaving Columbia, my mind started kind of just spinning out as far as what else I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I saw the A&R landscape changing.
Yeah.
I saw, it wasn't just the A&R research thing, which I'm sure we can come back to and talk about. And it wasn't just kind of this transition into research playing a larger and larger role in A&R. It was really kind of the shift going from being inside of the building in a lot of ways to outside of the building. When I started, even at 17, so much of what I wanted to do was make change from the inside. I wanted to infiltrate, the reason I wanted to be at a major label and not be the indie rock kid at, a cool indie that was putting out most of the stuff that I was listening to, was because my feeling was I wanted to get in on the inside and fuck shit up there. Can I say fuck on this?
Yeah,
great.
please.
Absolutely not.
Great.
No, I'm kidding.
I want to fuck shit up from the inside. That was really important to me. And you just started kind of feeling that was less and less possible. I think I started noticing even at, kind of the end of my time at Columbia that managers and the artists themselves, as they should, were kind of having more and more of a kind of control over everything, not just the whole kind of overall plan. And I kind of started seeing a lot of my job being more coordination than something creative and exciting. And I didn't think that was something that wasn't sustainable for me. That I wasn't. And also I had been there for so long that, I didn't feel like I was learning as much. There were still great opportunities. There was amazing music. There were great people, but I didn't feel like I was getting as much out of it. I feel like I'd gotten a lot out. Plus I had grown up there.
Yeah.
That place to me was basically college and grad school. And and they were my family, they were the most amazing people. And it just, I'd had it. And so, the point in my saying that was around the time that I started thinking, okay, what else is there outside of the label world? What else do I want to do? And I still went to Capitol Records, which was also amazing. And that to me was kind of going to Harvard Business School in some ways.
Yeah.
That was kind of being able to come in there in the role that I had, working with some of the people I got to work with, was really amazing. And I got to work with great artists. I got to meet a ton of people. I got to continue working with someone who's very important in my life and my career, a gentleman by the name of Ashley Newton, who is the president and EVP of he's the president of Capitol Records, EVP of special projects for Universal Music Group. He had been the president of Columbia Records before that and kind of been my mentor for about 10 years.
Wow.
He went over to Capitol shortly before I did. And, so that, also allowed us to keep working together. And that's always a nice thing to kind of have that continuity with people. And there are, just a bunch of great people over there who, I think are fantastic. But at the end of that run, it was time to, basically just go off and do anything I wanted to do. I think for me, a big part was the fact that I was 17 when I started working at a major corporation. And I never felt like I owned my brain and my ideas, things that came up. If I had an idea in the middle of the night of an app I wanted to do or whatever it was, it didn't matter, a podcast, like I couldn't do it.
Right.
I didn't have the freedom to go do that. And that always bothered me. And so, look, I started something called We Few Group. It's a purposely kind of vague name, which comes from Henry V from the St. Crispin's Day speech. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers. Because to me, it was, this whole thing was about kind of having fun with people who you care about. And the general mantra for, people are like, what do you do now? Post label, my answer is I get to do work that excites me with people I like. And, that kind of knows no boundaries.
Right.
I don't know what things will fall under that necessarily. There's so many. I didn't think I would be doing stuff in the iced tea space. I didn't think that I would be, I didn't know I would have a publishing venture with, a good friend. There's just so many things that have come up. But the fun part is that I can say yes to the things I want to say yes to and no to things that I don't believe in.
Right. That's awesome. So, in your experience, and this is obviously a very broad question, but you've obviously had a lot of experience specifically in the A&R space. What does a good A&R look like to you?
I think that's a great question and a completely impossible to answer question. Because I think
it means just for you.
But I think a great A&R person comes in so many different forms. I think it really depends on the artist and what their needs are.
Right.
I think there are some artists, someone said to me at one point that there's an A&R person doesn't get paid more to meddle.
Yeah.
If an artist comes in and delivers you a great album, you can just say thank you.
Yeah.
There are other artists that need you in the studio. There are other artists that want you in the studio, but don't need you there. There are some artists who want your feedback. There's some artists who need it, but don't want it. I think And sometimes that's finessing those moments and making sure that you're doing what you want to do. And sometimes that's understanding that you don't need to do that. I think more and more now, the importance of the job is really being able to rally the troops inside the label.
Yeah.
Which is, not necessarily the glamorous part of the job because it's not outward facing. And everyone wants to go, oh, you do A&R. That's so cool. You're out with art. A lot of the most important parts of those jobs are making sure that everyone else is doing their job.
Yeah.
It's not just the rest of it. I don't want to discount any of the creative parts, but I think the most important part right now, especially as artists have more and more of their own vision and are coming, I think especially now as artists are getting signed with more frequently with records that are already breaking in some respects, or, with fan bases that already exist, those artists are, some of them are more open than others to kind of collaborating. And by that, I don't even mean with other writers and producers. I mean, just with their A&R person.
Yeah.
And again, sometimes that's a necessary thing and sometimes it's not. But I think when you have those situations, what's important is, getting through the label, right? Like, you could sign an artist who is super buzzy and broke a song, had a song break on TikTok, and you do a huge deal. And a few weeks later, something new and shiny comes along, and maybe the artist that you signed is, slowing down. It's not performing as anticipated, and people have kind of moved on to the next new and shiny thing. It's still your job to go and make sure that not only is there a plan for your artist, but that everyone else is on board, and that, that you're keeping everyone else, you know, and it's a lot of politicking in that sense. You know, it really is.
What can you speak to? Because whether or not you're in that specific scenario where you're trying to politic internally inside a label and get support, like just that notion of like being able to play to the powers of bureaucracy and keep other people excited about your project. Can you speak about your experience as to how you were able to maintain and build momentum and excitement around the projects you were working on?
I think it's like it begins at home, right? And by that I mean with the A&R person. I think if you don't have a genuine excitement around something, you probably don't belong working on it. Mm-hmm. You know, I think the most important thing is, and at least this is for me, I can only really speak to my experience and how I function.
Right.
I believe when you sign an artist or when you manage an artist or when you do anything with an artist, you're taking on a tremendous responsibility. Forget about the money you're spending or your job you're putting on the line or whatever that kind of stuff is. Like, you know, for an artist, I think outside of probably their child or their mother, there's nothing more important to them than their art, right? Than their music. And you're taking partial responsibility for that. Right? You're convincing them to sign away, you know, their kind of rights and control to it in some respects, depending on the deal, whatever.
Right.
You know, and I don't think that's something to be taken lightly.
Right.
And so, yeah, I think it's having that enthusiasm for the artist and being able to protect them and protect their vision and make sure that you're doing what's in their best interests for the longevity of their career. I think really, and I don't think I realized this as much when I was in the middle of it, but looking back on it or having artists of my own now that I manage inside of labels, you know, I think there's this interesting thing for the A&R person because they are the point person for the artist, but they're the point person for the artist who is on the payroll of the label. And there's there's an inherent conflict there.
Yeah.
You know, and I think sometimes and I think that's part of how I knew that I wanted to do stuff in management was that I saw that a lot of the times I was also kind of taking a management role on because a lot of times I was kind of not towing the label line.
Yeah.
You know, for me, it was about, I really just care. And I think most people at labels mean really well. I think, and I genuinely mean that. And I think most people at labels really do have the artist's best interest in mind. But I also think that at the end of the day, a lot of the time, the artist has to win because it's theirs. It's their name on the, you know, it's now on Spotify, right? It's not my name. It's not the label's on the P line. The artist is, you know, the one who needs to go to sleep every night with that.
Right.
And be proud of that. And that's, you know, always what's mattered to me. So what do I think a good A&R person is? I think it's someone who can help with what the artist needs and be there for them in whatever capacity is necessary.
Do you feel like the artist ever has brought you in too much, where you're like, I work with consultants, and I think, one thing that's always funny that I hear is they think that we're they think we're on the management team. So then requests come in that are kind of crazy, and it's not necessarily stuff that we do. It's like, so do you think that towing that line has ever gone too far, where you're like, oh, obviously it's not a big deal or whatever, but it's like, oh man, I wasn't expecting to get that request, or caught you off guard, or you've been down for the cause? Because that's,
I've always been, my thing is always like, it's a team.
Yeah.
Like, you're part of the team. And again, I think, and this is not just a podcast of why I'm not at a label currently. But I don't know that I don't know that I see things as concretely as kind of labels have departments.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think the A&R person has a lane. Mm-hmm. It's not like, I think there are people with greater expertise in certain areas, but I think it's got to always be all hands on deck. And I think, to me, the answer to what is a great label team is people who leave every night having at least accomplished one thing for their artist. And I think the goal should be, at the end of every day, I don't care how big your roster is, have I done something today to move every single artist on my roster forward?
Yeah.
Could be setting up a session. It could be just making a phone call, sending a link to someone, telling, just doing something.
Yeah.
Because these are people's lives we're playing with.
That's a great metric. And I think as soon as you get a lot of artists on, I think that's a good thing to think about in management too.
Yeah.
If you get a lot of artists in management, just like, what have I done today for this artist, that artist, You
have to. Like, I think, again, you're playing with people's realities.
So you spoke on how you like a lot of different genres, and you've worked with a lot of different genres.
Yeah.
What have you learned that it applies to all genres, and then what have you learned that only applies to one or two? Or
the thing that I think applies to everything is the fan comes first.
Mm-hmm.
Not as far as, and I don't mean that like make the art that the fans want. I mean, the fans are there, that this exists for the fans. And fans are the same across genre. And I think what's cool right now is just the total blurring of genres and the amount of things I can't, when people are like, oh, what kind of artist is it? I have no idea. I have no clue what so many artists are, want to tag themselves as right now. And I think that's hugely exciting. But before, I think when there were clear delineations, right? When there was metal and emo, pop punk, screamo, and EDM, and, whatever, pop, bubblegum pop and country, whatever, when you look at all of those spaces, and I'm a live music junkie, and I look at a lot of things from the live space, and I love music festivals, and I think they can be great barometers of where things are. But I think what struck me the first time I went to Ultra, when I started working in a bunch of dance music stuff, was how similar it was to Warped Tour. And what struck me, and how similar Warped Tour was to Ozfest, and how similar, all of these things, and look, Stagecoach is the same as Coachella. It's the same. It's literally, they're using the same footprint.
Yeah.
I think those the t-shirts they're wearing are different. The marks that they put on to kind of differentiate themselves visually are different. But I think those fans want a lot of the same things, and I think that's why I was saying earlier, like, what I love is subcultures. I love seeing those scenes grow. Mm-hmm. And what happens after they grow is, they kind of morph into just general pop culture. And suddenly you have, I think bands like Fall Out Boy, for example, or My Chemical Romance, or any of those bands, they rose to the top of a specific genre and now cross into pop, and not just to be on pop radio, but you can tell their influence, right? Like, then there's a Lil Peep song, the posthumous Lil Peep song has Fall Out Boy on it.
Yeah.
And I think, and that's decades later, in this whole new subgenre. I think it all kind of then bleeds together. So I think that's kind of what's exciting. Things I've learned that work in one genre and don't work in the. I think dance music has a lot of intricacies. A lot of intricacies. And I'll be really frank, I was really pretty ignorant to most of the dance space when I ended up in it.
Yeah.
My journey to the dance space was totally bizarre. It was really because I heard this song online one day by a group called Cruella. And really what struck me about it was, to me, it was almost more like pop metal with drops. And, from there, I didn't know that really anything about the dance music space. And I ended up signing this act, and that was the world that they lived in, and they taught me a lot. And then through that and kind of the total immersion in that world, met a bunch more people and kind of players and captains of that scene. And was lucky enough to work with a bunch of other great acts in that world. But it was never about, I want to do EDM music because there's an EDM thing happening. It was,
right.
I heard one thing and then I heard another thing. But, that world still, is not something that I could ever call myself an expert in.
Right.
When it comes to the A&R side, how much of it is your own personal taste versus seeing what is trending and even just growing to evolve your own personal taste to be accepting and have a good read on stuff that might not necessarily be your initial cup of tea?
I think there's a difference between loving something, getting it kind of intrinsically and innately, and wanting to go home and listen to it. I kind of seeing what's trending, seeing what's, from a research point of view, from whatever point of view, I like to listen to everything that's happening. Just in general, just have a breadth of knowledge and awareness. And from those things, there's things I love and things I don't necessarily love. I don't think I've ever worked on something or even gone after something that I didn't love in some respect. My barometer, does it make me feel like I just got punched in the face? What does that mean? I think Slipknot's song "Eyeless" makes me feel like I got punched in the face. I think Adele's "Someone Like You" makes you feel like I got punched in the face. I think it doesn't matter what it is. It does this make me feel something immediately?
Right.
That's what I care about.
Yeah. No, I love that. You mentioned Cruella. What are some of the artists who had this ascent that you were a part of, that looking back was one of the most exciting journeys in your career?
Krewella was definitely a fun one. They really were. Just because we were doing something that felt boundary pushing at the time in a different way. First of all, because they were, there was all this stuff happening in EDM. There were so many eyes on this EDM space, and the girls were legit DJs. But they were also incredible songwriters and vocalists, and no one was really doing that. And just even trying to explain to people that, yes, they're going to be behind the decks, but they're also going to be coming out and singing, and some of their sets not. And I guess now it's not as crazy, but at the time, trying to talk to, publicity about TV bookings or people did trying to wrap their heads around that was really tough. And those girls are uncompromising, and there were a lot of and they were very. I think I learned some interesting lessons from them too, just about this, their desire to really stay true to who they were and to never try and alienate or betray their fans. Their fans were so important to them that there were a lot of opportunities they were totally fine passing up because it could, it wasn't about losing the fans' approval. It was about, what does this mean to, what does this mean for us? Are we those people? So that was a great one.
What do you think made, because they've become very big and definitely had a great ascent, what do you think were some of the key inflection points or key actions that they took that really helped them get to the stage of kind of success that they reached?
I think a lot of it was education. Internally, within a label, externally, education for myself, educating the label, just kind of figuring out how we were going to break this act. Again, that you had a really strong-willed act. You had two young, really smart and hungry managers. And you had, depending on what era of Cruella it was, 3 or 2 people who, again, were really ambitious, were getting a lot of great opportunities. And it was trying to figure out how to balance everything and how to really kind of break down that this wasn't just this wasn't just an EDM thing. This wasn't a dubstep thing. This wasn't a pop thing. And trying to kind of balance all those things, right? How do you do the top 40, radio shows, in the summer and also play a bunch of the huge dance festivals and be taken really seriously there? Which again, all of these things sound, this is what happens every year now at those festivals, but that was not the case at that time.
Right.
There were tours that we turned down. There were just things that happened that were also, and also just even simple things, right? It was, how do you bring radio people out when the artist isn't going, the tours the artists were doing at the time were, proper nightclub shows, right?
Yeah.
And people, their set times sometimes were 3 a.m.
Right.
Those were, challenges as well.
Yeah.
That was challenging for me sometimes.
Yeah.
I didn't want to be out at 3 a.m.
Yeah, no, I'm sure.
It's even worse in the house techno world that I'm in sometimes with clients where their set will start at literally 6 a.m.
I mean,
if you get into it though, man, I've been in some of those shows. If you get into it, it's
incredible.
Yeah, that time.
But I'll never forget having to talk to the chairman of the label and every department head when I worked with an act called ZHU. His first ever U.S. show. I mean, this was incredible. The fact that they pulled this off was absolutely incredible. But the shows were 2 nights. I think it was over Halloween at a warehouse in Bushwick. The only way to get the tickets was to wait online at opening ceremony and get the vinyl. When you got the vinyl single, the ticket in it had the location.
Damn, the ticket in it had the location.
And the show started at 2 a.m.
That's wild. I remember that. I remember hearing about that. Yeah.
And it was it was one of the first times ever that they did that thing where they take your phones and put those in those yonder pouches.
Oh, nice.
Oh, yeah.
So there were also no phones. Which again, so you're now talking about, how do I convince everyone that, this is a great, because culturally it was an incredible idea, right?
Yeah.
Kids were talking, it was for the kids, it was for the fans.
Yeah.
But you're also dealing with the industry side, right? You're also dealing with, I have a boss and a bunch of people who are excited about this artist, who spent money to sign this artist in a competitive deal, who, now want to be able to bring people out and make sure this does right. There's a level of expectation of what can come next. Now you're saying, so you want me to go get people out at a 2 a.m. show in Bushwick around Halloween. And their phones are going to be taken from them. Cool. Okay. So those were struggles. But again, I don't think they or I would have ever changed that, because and you go, this is kind of peak, social media really becoming an incredibly important tool, right? And you're so people aren't going to be able to share photos, because there are no photos,
right.
So if nothing, you're like, this is so cool, this is going to create such a moment, but no one's going to be able to share it.
Yeah.
But it was for the right reasons. Like, they did it because that was for the fans. And again, that's why it goes back to, it's all about the fans. I'm a fan. I want, I still want the bands that I love to do things the way I, as a fan, want to see them.
Right.
For sure.
Right.
Now, 2 things I like there. One, I think, is it's a show, but they took this completely reimagined perspective as to how they could create this really unique experience to not only build hype leading into it, but also at the event itself. So I think for everybody listening too, it's like, there's make music, release the music, have shows, tour. There's so much opportunity to innovate and come up with unique concepts that people aren't even really thinking about. So to hear that story is really powerful.
Oh, but I'm sorry, I forgot the other thing. And no one was going to see his face.
There you go.
He was going to be covered by a screen the entire time.
That's amazing.
It could have not been him at that point. Like, no, not only can nobody have their phones, but he's behind the screen. So even if you find out it's not him, you can't record it.
There it is. Okay. I think the other thing is for ZHU. What do you? Same question for Cruella, but like, what do you think were those turning points or those things that really helped that career blossom the way it did?
ZHU was a different beast in the sense of Faded was a huge song internationally by the time we got involved.
Okay.
And, his process was really unique. I mean, the first time he ever played a show ever, he was direct support at a giant festival in Australia. So it was like, it was already kind of kicking off. But, I think, both of those acts, what were the turning points? I think for ZHU, it was the Skrillex and They record. I think that was a huge turning point.
Oh, I love that record.
Because I think it gave him I think everyone knew that him and Skrillex were friends. I think, none of that was surprising. I think he had gotten all of the cred and cosigns imaginable, but I think putting out a song like that was kind of a different vibe to anything he had released before, just kind of showed people how ambitious he is.
Right.
And kind of how willing to take chances he is.
Yeah. That's amazing.
So you were at a label for a really long time.
Guilty.
You were there during like the massive layoff period between like 2004 and 2010 or 2004 and 2012 or something like that. How did you do it? What are some of the things that you learned in order to stay at the company, in order to
make
thrive?
as little money as possible? No, sir. I mean, look, so many of those years, like I was so under the radar in a sense, right? I was an intern, I was a junior scout, I was an assistant, I was a junior A&R. Like as you're coming up, like I don't think I was registering on headcount. But look, it was the weirdest thing. Like I'll never forget, like you would just, the phrase was, I hear it's Friday. And that would be kind of what was whispered around the office, right? I hear it's Friday, meaning layoffs are going to go down this Friday because they would always happen on a Friday.
Damn.
And you would kind of just
it's like a horror movie. Like people
it was. I think you didn't know who was going to survive. There were a bunch of people who I loved who got let go, but in some ways, one of the almost everyone really landed on their feet. Everyone landed on their feet, but I think within, the industry, everyone would always kind of move around. And what was in some ways for me being young at that time helpful was as people would get let go or leave one place, they would go somewhere else and it kind of expanded my network.
Yeah.
So selfishly, that was, kind of this interesting thing because all of a sudden I would go catch up with someone over lunch and then go meet a whole bunch of other people of their new coworkers. And,
right.
That was definitely kind of a positive part. How did I survive? Again, like it was kind of, I put my head down and did work. But I really think it came down to, I was just lucky enough to not be on the radar.
Right. So I'm not going to ask you what your discovery tactics are, but I will ask you what's advice for artists in order to get discovered, in your opinion.
So I'll tell you my discovery tactic. I mean, one of the thing that I think is my best discovery tactic is people. I love people. I talk to tons of people, genuinely, whether it's, people in the industry, friends of friends, people online, whoever. It's kind of like, I'm kind of always looking to talk to people who, whether they're in the industry or outside of it and just fans of anything. I love information. I love hearing about things. And I think the best way for, I think almost everything that I care about that I've found out about in a meaningful way, really at some point has been through kind of people I trust.
Yeah.
There's some exceptions, but for the most part, it's, I look at things I look at a lot of things like here. And again, this goes back to why I'm doing things now the way I'm doing them is who are people I like and trust and believe in? Okay, what can we do together? Mm-hmm. And that, so sometimes that's someone who I meet who's managing something, and then I would go, okay, can we sign it? What can we work on together? Things like that. It was never about, I am rarely the guy. I was never good. I always envied, whether it was on MySpace or on SoundCloud. People are like, oh, how'd you find that? Oh, I was just browsing on SoundCloud and clicking. Yeah. I've never once found something that I care about. Just clicking, or on MySpace. It was like, oh, I clicked through their top 8 friends and who are their friends or there. It's like, that has never been something that works for me. Probably the closest thing was there was a website for a while called We Are Hunted, which I miss desperately because I think it was one of the best curated sites ever. But that was a great kind of aggregator. It doesn't exist. It was like kind of a souped up hype machine. That was awesome. Other than that, but as far as how artists can get discovered, I think artists should, and I think they are worrying less and less about getting discovered by labels and A&R people. And I think artists should do what artists want to do and what they believe is right for them. I think this isn't a cop-out answer. I just there are some artists who rise to the occasion by becoming the biggest artist in their backyard and really breaking locally. There are artists who break on Spotify. There are artists who break because, someone else uses a song of theirs in a TikTok. There are artists who break because someone from the New York Times finds them and writes about them. There's so many bizarre ways for things to be discovered now. I think, look, again, the thing that I would hope that artists do is try to build sustainable careers for themselves.
Right.
And not need a label or not need, and I'm not saying they shouldn't have a label, but I think it's not about how, it should be about what are the things that you are going to be able to do to help your art pay your bills.
Right.
And let you tour or not pay your bills if you just want to do it as a hobby, or if you want, if it's not about touring, but you want money to make the videos and execute the videos that you want to do, figure out how to do those things, right? That to me is much more of an exciting conversation than how does an artist get signed? How does an artist get on this festival? Ultimately, there is no equation for that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Do your research, trust yourself.
Right.
Find the things that excite you, find your community, find the people who are going to listen to your records.
Right.
What's it been like diving deeper in that realm, going from kind of being on the label side where there's tons of scale, there's all these different artists, all these different moving priorities, to kind of moving on and really starting to manage and have your own kind of roster of artists? How has that shift from kind of now being a manager versus being an A&R? How do you enjoy it? It's a different type of politicking?
Yeah, look, I love it. I absolutely love it. I think, everyone wants to joke me, is it so hard being a manager? And it's like, no, it's just, at the end of the day, the mission statement on that side of it's the same. At least for me, it's, work with artists and help them achieve their goals and their visions and help grow things. Which again, I think any member of an artist team, that should be the ambition. So, no, I think that transition has been really easy. It's been really refreshing to kind of have to hustle in a different way, and kind of just figure out, again, things that otherwise either would have been done for me because another department would have handled it if I had signed artists at a label, or, things that I was kind of not able to do because, again, that wasn't quote unquote my job.
Right.
Even sometimes just randomly staying up super late into the night, finding a random blog that might like an artist and, kind of just emailing them being like, hey, check this out.
Yeah.
Just stuff like that where it's really, I love the hand-to-hand combat aspect of it. That's not at the end of the day what's probably going to, make or break things, but it's kind of, I like that freedom.
Right.
I like just,
I like it too. One of the main reasons why I ended up in management is because I was interning at 3 different companies. I was like this music publishing, okay, I'm not really too into it, but I get it. Then I interned at a label. I was like, this is cool, but it seems like the buck is stopping too early. I have to do certain things and I can't do other things. I can't help fully. And I was like, well, I kind of like telling the story. I'm going to get into PR. And then you start talking to the artists, getting to know their story, but then you only do their PR. So I was like, all right, well, what can I do where I can just actually do whatever? And it just ended up being management, But I also think everything falls on management, no matter what. So whether it's a big task or a small task, whether it's menial as fuck or you're having $1 million meeting, it all falls on management. And that's also what I like about it too. It's hard for me at least to be an arrogant manager.
Yeah.
Because you're like eating shit all the time. You know what I mean? That's the great part about it, you know? You're eating shit and you popping bottles.
No matter
all
what it is. I mean, you can look at the biggest manager. I mean, that they're, no matter how big your staff is at the end of the day, if you're the manager, if you're dealing with it.
Yeah, exactly. But that freedom is definitely really important. And why people do it, I think it's why I do it for sure.
So Harrison Rebler, one of our first guests on the podcast who connected us, I was like, we got Andrew coming on tonight. Thanks again for the intro. What's this man know better than anybody else in the world? And he said that when it comes to international, you're the guy. Can you talk a little bit about your experience? And first of all, just by I think even before we started recording, you were excited about the release of a global top 10 chart and this opportunity to really be strategic in helping artists break internationally. Can you talk about what drew you to helping artists scale internationally? And then we'll dive into kind of the how.
Sure. So the kind of flashback to how I got interested in this was really simple. There were two things. One is I love traveling. For me, and this goes back to, why I love, the holiday time and being able to just read and catch up on movies. I'm a firm believer that your output's only as good as your input, right? What you're exposed to, what you read, the information you take in, without that kind of stuff, you're stagnant, you're stale, and you're not going to do, the exciting work that I want to do. And so I love just being exposed to stuff.
Right.
And when I was in high school and college, I was really there was a scene coming out of the UK. There was kind of this indie guitar band scene that I loved. The Libertines are still, one of my absolute favorite bands. And basically I would fly over, I would kind of save up money and fly over to the UK and go see shows and go record shopping and go just, look at 7 inches. I would get NME. One of the perks of being a junior A&R scout at Columbia Records was I got an NME subscription, which I think probably would have cost $500 a year to get imported from the UK here at the time. And I would literally that was my Bible. But a lot of the stuff you couldn't hear, you definitely couldn't buy here. iTunes was geo-blocked. So I would be buying, I would have someone in the UK buy me an iTunes gift card that I had a fake.
Geo-blocked?
iTunes was geo-blocked. So if it was, So if you were on iTunes in the UK, if you were a UK band that didn't have a US label yet, your stuff wasn't available in the US.
Oh, if you weren't distributing to the US. Got it.
So things weren't coming out day and date like they do now. So I had a fake UK iTunes account that I'd have gift cards on. And I would go record shopping over there anyway, because you would find these things and they just wouldn't come out here. And that always puzzled me in a weird way. So as I progressed in my career, at Columbia at the time, there was a lot of A&R people. And it was harder and harder. There was, everyone was kind of looking at a lot of the same things.
Right.
And I think that mixed with the fact that a bunch of artists that I was working with at the time were doing really well internationally, which gave me an excuse to be able to say, oh, I want to go over with them. I want to go to the UK with them. I want to go to Australia with them, or, wherever with them. Led me to be able to interact in a different way with a bunch of the other territories. And through that, got to meet a whole bunch more people who could tip me off to great things.
Right.
And so it gave me kind of my own lane. And it also got me to see a lot of places that I otherwise wouldn't have necessarily gotten to go.
Yeah.
And so I kind of became at Columbia this de facto international A&R guy, meaning I would mostly interface with the UK and Australia and pick up records of stuff they were signing, or occasionally help them to close something that was competitive that they needed to know there was a US home for.
Right.
And that was really it. But I really started looking at the fact that things were only coming out in their local territories.
Yeah.
And then suddenly it was changing, right? As Spotify was coming to the forefront, things were starting to come out more and more at the same time.
Yeah.
But no one was looking at them.
Right.
And I think kind of the best example was, Lucas Graham, who were passed on, but there was a band from Denmark and no one really paid attention because no one necessarily thought that a band from Denmark was all of a sudden going to have a huge song in the US.
Right.
And there's a bunch of great acts from Denmark. But really it was the fact that people were just not paying attention. And also there was this kind of feeling because of the way a lot of, without getting too boring, intercompany royalty structures set up for international releases, there wasn't really an incentive for other territories to take ownership of part of the A&R process. So if an act is signed out of Denmark, for example, a lot of the time you just release the album that would have been put out in Denmark here. You're not going, oh, you know, it might work better for, you know, for the US doing X, Y, or Z. Can we get a different song? I don't know if actually this single is the right first single. Let's all talk about it.
Right.
Right. That always really bothered me.
Yeah.
So when I was going over to Capitol and I had the opportunity to kind of, you know, help shape what my role was going to be, the thing that I said I really wanted to focus on was international.
Yeah.
Universal Music Group has this incredible international footprint. There's also a lot of artists who will do, you know, local deals, you know, and just for their territory, or they'll do a deal for the world, but carve out North America. There are all these opportunities on the table that people weren't looking at. And that was to say nothing of emerging markets, right? That was to say nothing of China and India. That was to say nothing of the K-pop space. That was to say nothing, you know, all these things that were going on that people just weren't looking at.
Yeah.
Or not looking at in a meaningful way.
Right.
I think, for example, if you want to look at China or India, you know, any of those things, people love to say, oh, there's a lot of opportunity in China. But like, I think very few people take the time to really understand it and to really learn about those markets. Right. There are people, I mean, there's another guy you should probably have on your show, a dude named Andrew Spalter, who in some ways is, you know, the most epic international guy. He was a manager and he ended up, you know, he had an artist who was doing very well in China. He was spending a lot of time there, and he's now basically started this company where all he does is help artists interface in China. Wow. You know, most recently he had like Will Smith, you know, doing stuff over there.
That's crazy.
But, you know, I think there's all these different markets that have different areas of expertise. And I was sitting in meetings, sometimes people go, okay, so like, what are we going to do with Asia? And you're like, dude, Asia's you can't say, what are we going to do with Asia? You know, like, you know, so I think to me, it was really about learning what was meaningful and learning about how to understand these different markets, right? If you look at, we'll go back to using Denmark as a, you know, an example, you know, they have their own radio, you know, obviously their own radio stations. They have their own award shows. There's different metrics. There's you know, independent festivals. And, you know, to me, it was about going into each of those territories and actually meeting all of those people, not just the label people. It was about meeting the festival bookers. It was about meeting the radio programmers, the, you know, playlisters, the, you know, whoever it was. I mean, I sat down with like a student journalist when I was over there once because, you know, they had a blog that was, you know, really on everything. And it didn't matter to me that it was a small country. What mattered to me was if the music coming out of it, there was stuff that was going to come out of it that was great. I want to know about it. You know, I don't think people take enough opportunity, you know, take enough advantage of opportunities to collaborate with artists, you know, who are far, you know, if you're looking to break in different territories and doing kind of specific versions of song for, you know, with different, you know, different artists on them. And again, that kind of became part of the international role at some point became constantly being hit up about putting collaborations together. And, you know, it was a lot of stuff in the Latin side of, you know, can you get so-and-so to jump on this Latin record? And I love doing that kind of stuff. I'm always happy to help with those kinds of things. I think, again, what a lot of people don't often pay attention to, a lot of times it's, here's a huge record that's exploding in one space. Can we also get the biggest artist, you know, in this other space on it? And it's like, we can start earlier than that, right? You can start with artists earlier on and help them grow and kind of take a holistic approach and find the right artist and not just like, who's the biggest name? You know, I get random emails constantly. Can you help get Billie Eilish or Post Malone on this song? It's like, no. Why? Like, no, I don't have, you know, no. That's not what I do. That's, you know, good luck. Here's all the information for people who you can contact to ask that, but that's not what I do. You know, but also like, it's kind of very in the box. But anyway, you know, so my international thing is, I genuinely don't believe that there should be any boundaries, you know, and borders around music. And I think, you know, that's becoming less and less of a real issue, thankfully. You know, you're looking at, you know, the rise of K-pop, which I think is just one small piece, but I think it's pretty huge when you have, you know, acts like Super M having a #1 record, you know, #1 album. I think that says a lot. I think, you know, to me, what's interesting is you have BTS, in the K-pop space, who've kind of taken the crown of being like the biggest K-pop group and the biggest K-pop boy band.
Yeah.
To me, what will be the most interesting is when you have an act, like a BTS or, in whatever genre, who just is the biggest act in the world.
Yeah.
Right. That to me becomes much more interesting than being the biggest of a subgenre and making a point, because it's kind of an anomaly. It'll be, when do you get something that just, where it doesn't matter, how it's portrayed. This is just what it is. This is just big.
Right. Yeah. That's amazing. I think I love the point you made about not necessarily always shooting for the big stars too. I mean, I think that works at a certain scale of artists, but I think a lot of times, similar to the extent that you can be early and identify different trends and focus on building with those guys as they grow, you grow.
Yeah. Yeah. One of my favorite things is when there's two artists I know separately that are both bubbling separately and they get together. Not like two massive people, but you're like, wait, they know each other? This is like, this is great. It's like you guys are you really feel like you're on the ground floor of something at the same time that two artists are bubbling and you get to see them collaborate for the first time, as opposed to being like, I don't know, somebody huge. Like if Drake and Nas never got on a track and they were on a track. I think it'd be like pretty awesome, right? But like, I don't know, JPEG and Slow Tie getting on the track would also be really awesome.
Epic.
And exactly.
That would be absolutely epic. Can we make that happen? Can the powers to be please make that happen?
Maybe.
But look, I think collaborations are the not so secret weapon of breaking artists right now. I think being able to kind of be in the middle of those Venn diagrams and kind of I think it costs like nothing to release music anymore, right? Like I think there's no amount of good music. If you've got good music, hopefully great music, I think it should come out. And I think, the more of it I think there, all of those plans and ideas of, we can't have too many records out at once. They compete against each other. We can't do this feature because we have this song going at radio. Like, I think the more things come out now, the better. I think it's just, unfortunately, everyone right now is just absolutely infatuated with the new and shiny and fresh. And if a song's been out for a week and it wasn't on New Music Friday, people are like, oh, well, the song is dead. It's like, well, the song isn't dead. But if you're going to be that kind of close-minded about it, then just keep releasing stuff, because your best chance of discovery is having something out there for people to discover and then be able to have them go back and find more stuff.
Right.
When you think about, how many tracks Billie Eilish released, and even the collabs, and some of the collabs, you look at them, were with artists who are much smaller.
Right.
Not necessarily at the time, but when you're looking at it, like, she was just open to doing things. And I think that, it's, again, they've always got to be the right artist. It's got to fit the art. It's not a marketing tactic. But I think if you're an artist who can go into the studio and collaborate with people, it's the most exciting thing. I mean, I learn a lot watching. I have an artist I manage named Rence, and he's constantly, hopping on other people's records, people hopping on his records. He goes into the studio with someone and he's go, we made a record together. I'm like, oh, like you co-resident? No, like, it's both of us. And I love that, but I love that.
Yeah.
And then you watch them come up together.
Right. And as a fan, that's like a magical moment, especially when they both get big.
And there's nothing better than having, I think there is no more powerful kind of cosign and discovery tool than being turned on to an artist by another artist you like.
Yeah.
It's kind of like when J. Cole and Kendrick, about 7 years ago, people were like, if that happened, oh my God. When that album they thought was going to come out, I've never seen an album get more hype that both the artists never even talked about. Like they never said anything. And they was like, oh man, it's coming. Oh shit, it's gotta. But it's a power of discovery and collaboration at the same time. So
I think it's the best.
Yeah.
Cool, man. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a fun conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Where can people find you online, if anywhere?
Twitter, at Andrew D. Keller. My Instagram is private. It's just photos of my dogs.
Nice.
Dogs are cool though, man.
Dogs are
Love
awesome.
Dogs.
I don't think everyone wants to see those. But yeah, I'm on Twitter. Find me there.
Boom.
Yeah, awesome.
Thank you so much, man.
Awesome. Thank you.